Hello everyone and welcome back to Affinity for Commander. My name is Alex and today we're going to be talking about the singular best landfall commander, the 4-colour Omnath, which they just are. They are the best landfall commander. Feel free to disagree about that in the comments, but I'm going to get into my reasons in just a second. But first, if you like any of the cards that I talk about here in this video or want to purchase the deck for yourself, then be sure to do so through any of our lovely affiliate links down in the description box below. Doesn't cost you anything extra and really helps the channel out a lot. Or if you want your Omnath, or any other commander for that matter, to look that extra bit special, then be sure to head over to altersleeves.com to peruse their extensive library of perfect fit altar sleeves. Again, links in the description box below. You can also find the particular altar sleeve that I use for my 4-colour Omnath deck, which is this one right here, which it captures the bit of rage that comes with him. I love it. As always, this type of content is brought to you and made possible thanks to the support of our amazing patrons. You guys are truly awesome. Now let's take a look at our all grown-up Jelly Bean and what insane value we can get from their extensive landfall triggers. For the deck, we're going to be looking to ramp very hard in the early game to ideally get Omnath out on turn 3 and then be able to trigger their second landfall on turn 4, thus generating us 8 mana in total on turn 4, which is pretty good if you ask me. But before we get too deep into strategy, let's actually look what our commander does. Omnath, Locus of Creation, is a 4/4 legendary creature elemental for 1 white, 1 blue, 1 green, and 1 red. They are currently assuming their 4th form, which will most likely lead to their 5th and final form being reached on our return to Zendikar. Our Omnath reads: when Omnath, Locus of Creation, enters the battlefield, draw a card. And has landfall with: whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life if this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. If it's the second time, add red, green, white, and blue to your mana pool. If it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. So the main idea of the deck is to trigger these abilities as many times as possible, ideally getting to that 3rd sweet trigger as often as physically we can, to make sure that we're clocking the table for 12, ideally every turn. But before we get into the landfall goodness of the Kool-Aid Man's cousin, let's actually take a look at what we're going to be doing in the early game. Omnath needs to get out quickly to be able to help cast our bigger spells, so as much ramp before turn 3 is ideal. So the 1 mana land dropper of Sakura Tribe Scout and the 2 mana Llanowar Scout can help us just drop an additional land a turn. We will also be seeing these two later on for our required silly combo. Sakura Tribe Elder is as good as ever and helps us grab a basic land whilst blocking any extremely early aggro. And Broken Bond, Growth Spiral, and Explore all let us play additional lands with upside. That being destroying our opponent's Soul Ring or just drawing a card. And the 1 mana enchantments of Exploration and Burgeoning should ensure we get our Omnath out a turn early. It is also important to note here that we are not running any of the signets, and there is a very good reason for this. Later in the game, these cards just become a dead draw. However, cards like Growth Spiral do still have the words draw a card on them, and can potentially lead to us being able to drop 2 lands a turn, triggering our multiple landfall abilities. So you will find absolutely no artifact ramp in this deck. It is all about getting more and more lands onto the battlefield, because that's how we win. And from here we have the main bulk and support of the deck, the 3 CMC slot, which, showing my age, the 3 mana value slot. No, still doesn't sound right. The reason why this slot is so important in this deck is the fact that we should now, on turn 3, have Omnath out. So we can now start taking advantage of his landfall triggers and getting that juicy 8 mana I talked about earlier, hopefully letting us play massive spells before we should, or getting multiple spells out a turn. And also hopefully doming everyone for 4, because that's also pretty good. Kodama's Reach and Cultivate are obvious choices for getting lands, along with Farseek and Harrow. I am also a massive fan of Tempt with Discovery. Now, if no one chooses to get a land, you've paid 4 mana to get a land, which isn't great. But that 4 mana probably came free from our Omnath's second landfall trigger, so not a massive loss. But if that one Boros player folds, then usually the rest of the table will as well. And 4 mana for 4 lands is then very broken. Very broken. However, we are running a lot of lands, so being able to drop them all in one turn is rather important. Azusa, Lost But Seeking, Wayward Swordtooth, and Dryad of Ilsean Grove all let us play additional lands in our turn, with Azusa being the absolute standout amongst these. Being able to play 3 lands a turn means that we can trigger all of our commander's abilities. Pair her with a card like Ramunap Excavator to just replay the same fetch land from your grave, then you'll be able to repeatedly grab lands from your deck, plus get 3 landfall triggers a turn. Or a slightly pricier option of Oboro Palace in the Clouds can just be used to bounce itself each time to allow us to replay it with Azusa 3 times, thus assuring everyone gets to eat Omnath's 3rd trigger every turn. At the 3-drop slot, we also have some land-based card advantage with Augur of Autumn and Courser of Kruphix, allowing us to play lands from the top of our library and even gain us a bit of life in the Courser's case. Tireless Tracker also generates us a clue whenever a land enters the battlefield, letting us straight draw from our lands later in the game. And Ramunap Excavator lets us replay any of our fetches from the bin over again. And I know I've mentioned this before, but just thinning your deck without having to use any cards from your hand is still quite frankly great. Now, it's at this point in the game in testing that I've often found my hand just completely bare, because you have all the mana in the world, you've dropped everything you've ramped, and now you're out of cards to do anything with. So at this point, we're going to need to start to look for some actual card advantage. Preferably land-based card advantage. Creatures like Tatyova Benthic Druid and Omnath Locus of the Royal let us draw cards by just playing our lands. The same is true for AC, Tyrant of Gaia Strait allows us to draw on landfall, but also lets us play an additional land to get some more sweet draw. Moving into the later game, now that we've restocked our hand, we're going to want to start getting some real value of all this land entering the battlefield, as well as Omnath generating us 4 additional mana a turn, hopefully. Rampaging Balos produces us 4/4s with every land. Angry Omnath makes us 5/5s with every land that bolts something when they die. Geode Ranger forces our opponents to attack each other, which, when we're hitting multiple lands a turn, this card can honestly quite quickly just sort a game out by itself alone. Tatyova, Protector of Argoth, makes us 5/3 elementals whenever a land we sacrifice for either Harrow triggers or a fetch land is activated. And of course, Avenger of Zendikar, be avenging all the time. My current record is 20 plant tokens, and I keep trying to break it, but I never quite get there. Let me know in the comments what's your highest Avenger of Zendikar. And if all else fails, then I suppose we can just have Multani Yavimaya avatar just come in and slap people around, considering they will be massive and they have trample, and you can't get rid of them outside of an exile effect. And their recursion ability of just putting 2 lands back to our hand is exactly what we want at this stage of the game. More lands in hand to replay them to get more landfall triggers. Another idea that I really wanted to work into this deck is cloning Omnath, because 12 damage a turn is pretty nice, but 24 is better. So to that end, Spark Double and Helm of the Host will be able to accomplish making us a non-legendary copy of Omnath quite nicely. And Helm of the Host, whilst being quite costly at playing the card and equipping, Omnath makes us that 4 additional mana on second landfall trigger, which we can then use to equip the Helm to. Suddenly, when you've got multiple Omnaths kicking around, Azusa and Oboro playing 3 lands a turn suddenly becomes very scary when 24 damage is being dispensed to the table every turn by just playing a land. Now, for this landfall themed deck, I thought it only appropriate to include a combo that involves infinite landfall triggers. This can be accomplished with Oboro, Palace in the Clouds, either of our scouts out, as well as retreat to Coral Helm already in play. First, bounce Oboro back to your hand with its own ability. Then, tap the scout to put it into play. This will then untap the scout with the enchantment's ability, and you can now repeat the process as many times as you wish. It is worth noting here that this does not generate you any actual mana advantage. However, there are several cards that we can be used here to now win the game. Both Spitfire Lagak and Tunneling Geopede deal damage whenever a land enters the battlefield, resulting in the death of everyone at the table. Or if you want our commander to be involved in this, then Emil the Blessed can blink our commander for 3 mana. We do this after his first 3 sets of triggers have resolved, so we'll have gained the life, added 4 mana to our mana pool, then domed everyone else for 4 damage. We can then use the 3 mana produced by Omnath to blink our commander with Emil's ability, and we now get to reuse those landfall abilities again, as they're now treated as new by our commander, as he's only technically just entered the battlefield. Wash, rinse, repeat this until all of your opponents are unalived. Now, as far as lands go for this deck, the first thing you might notice about the deck list is that we're running quite a lot more basics than you might expect from a 4-color deck. The reason for this is quite simple. A lot of our fetch abilities are only able to grab basics, not dual lands, which, considering we're svamping so hard, having to get basics isn't that much of a problem. I've playtested this deck a lot myself and never had an issue with color fixing. Now, apart from these, the only obvious inclusion is going to have to be every single fetchable land possible. And I do mean every fetch land possible. I mean the proper fetches, Fabled Passage and Prismatic Vista 2. Each of these lands by themselves represents 2 landfall triggers, not to mention that small amount of colour fixing that I mentioned earlier. Plus, the fetch lands interact really well with a load of cards from our deck. Roundup Excavator lets us replay them, Titania lets us get a 5/3 from any of their triggers going to the bin. It's honestly, they are needed in this deck 110%. Omnath, Locus of Creation as a commander is going to be gaining you a silly amount of life, ramping you a silly amount, that is coloured mana by the way, that is important, and doming the table for 12. And that's not by using cards and abilities in your hand, that's just the playing of lands that you were going to do anyway. Their colour identity allows us to have all the best landfall cards that others might not have access to, and their abilities let us play all of them very consistently. Honestly, if you get out this angry, mana-made, lawful, and wet elemental will help you just completely dominate any game. And that will be the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. What are your personal favourite landfall cards for Omnath? Let us know in the comments below. If you like this type of content, there are a few things you can do to help the channel out. Liking this video, subscribing, and following us on whatever social media platform you prefer. Well guys, that's it from me. As always, I've been Alex, and I will see you next time.